Welcome to this little how-to guide, produced by Karnkai Camera Club, Redruth. In this guide we will look at a technique called focus stacking. Focus stacking involves taking a number of images of the same subject, with the focus set on different elements in the image, then merging the images together, to produce a single image with a far greater depth of field than would otherwise be possible. Because focus stacking involves merging several images into one, it's great for static subjects, but it is not a viable technique where there is a lot of movement. Focus stacking is a very useful technique for macro photography, where the nature of the subject means depth of field is normally very limited, even at small apertures. But focus stacking can be equally useful when shooting landscapes, when you want to create an image where the foreground, middle ground and far distance are all in sharp focus. The starting point of course is to get the images you want to stack. To minimize camera movement and to make it easier to align the images, it's best to mount your camera on a sturdy tripod, and using a remote release, or using the self-timer may also help. With practice you may be able to get away with hand-holding your camera, especially with landscapes where you have a bit more latitude. For this demonstration I'll use this old circuit board. Notice how I can't get the whole of the circuit board in focus. It's quite sharp near the camera, but the focus falls off rapidly towards the back. With the camera on a tripod, I'll focus on a part of the subject nearest the camera. Then take the first photo. You can use manual focus or autofocus. Remember though, not to move the camera. Frame your subject, lock the camera in position, and if using autofocus, use single point autofocus, and move the focus point before each shot. Once we have the first shot, then it's just a matter of progressively moving the focus point, not the camera, towards the back of the subject, taking a new shot each time. The number of shots you need will vary according to the subject and your requirements. I will limit it to 7 for this example. So we now have several shots of the same subject, but with different parts of the subject in focus on each one. Notice that in this case the files all have the REF extension. They are RAW files from a Fuji camera. You can of course shoot JPEG if you prefer, but RAW files give the best quality and more scope for editing. We now need to get these files into Photoshop. Open Photoshop. Choose File. Open. Find the images. Select them all by clicking on the first one, holding Shift. Then click on the last one. Then click Open. Because they are RAW files, they will open in Adobe Camera Raw, where you can make adjustments if you want. But for now simply press Ctrl+A to select them all. Then select Open. Note that if you used JPEG files, you won't see this, the images will open directly in Photoshop. The next stage is to stack the images. Select File, and then Scripts, load files into stack. Then click Add Open Files. The files will be listed in the dialog box. Make sure the option to automatically align source files is ticked. That way Photoshop will do its best to line up the images. Make sure the option to create a smart object is not selected, otherwise you won't be able to complete the next step. Click OK and let Photoshop create a new image, with each original image as a new layer. If you are coming from Lightroom you can shortcut this procedure. Locate the original images in Lightroom. Select all the images you want to stack. Right-click on any of the images. And select Edit in. Open as layers in Photoshop. And this part of the job is done. All the images are automatically loaded as layers. RAW files are automatically converted if necessary, without you needing to do anything more. However you got here, you should now have a file that contains all your images as layers. The idea now is to pick the sharpest areas from each layer, and merge them to produce an image which is as sharp as we can get, across the entire frame. Fortunately, we do not need to do this manually. Photoshop can automatically do this for us. First we need to select all the layers. Click on the first layer, hold Shift, then click on the last layer. Then select Edit, Auto Blend Layers. Make sure that Stack Images is selected. By ticking Seamless Tones and Colors, you will get smoother transitions between the images. And Content Aware Fill will attempt to fill any blank areas around the outside of the image. Press OK. The result is an image that now looks like this. Photoshop has determined which parts of each layer have the sharpest focus, and has automatically created layer masks to make sure these are visible on the final image, at the same time hiding the more out of focus elements. You can see now that much more of the circuit board is in focus than it was in any single image. P020 can clearly be read on the chip at the top of the image, while the text on the black component towards the front is also readable. Compare this to the original images. The result is very impressive, but it's not perfect. If we zoom in and move around, then the vast majority of the image looks good. However, there are usually some areas, typically towards the edges of the frame, where things are not so impressive. This is sometimes a result of Photoshop not being able to align the layers accurately, movement of the camera or subject between images, or simply, no sharp focus version of this area being available. Of course, if these areas are at the edge of the frame, you can always crop them out. And it's something you can allow for when you take the original images. That concludes this little guide, produced by Karnkai Camera Club, Redruth. We hope you found it useful. If there are any other topics that you'd like us to cover, then we're open to suggestions, by email or via our Facebook page. Finally, don't forget that Karnkai Camera Club, the friendly camera club, meets every Wednesday at 7 o'clock. In the Karnkai Community Institute, Redruth. New members always welcome.